Hello, welcome back to GOT. Today we are going to dive deep into the camera comparison between the Motorola Razr Fold and the Vivo X Fold 5. And we're going to actually discuss why both of them are different in the way they perform. The imaging and everything is really close. You have a different perspective from each of them. So let's dive into it. Let's go. So, like I said, they both approach things a little differently. They have a partnership with Zeiss on the Vivo, and Zeiss is all about the lens, the coating, and the processing. You're supposed to get less flare and glare with the Zeiss lens and more optimal processed colors. And then here you have the Pantone color display here on Motorola, or the processing, and it's supposed to be much more natural and colorful, and that's all Motorola's own processing. So quite a bit different. Does third party help out and make things better? We're going to find out as we take a close look. Now, before we do that deep dive, let's talk about the screens real quick. On the Vivo, you have a 55 nits rating on the external and 45 on the internal. On this one, you have 62 nits on the outside and 6,000 on the internal. But this is how they play out. When you play HDR content on both of them, check it out. The Vivo is much brighter than the Motorola. That's very interesting. Even on the outside screen, you can see it's supposed to be 55 versus 6200. That's quite a bit difference. Now, when you flip things around and now you're looking at the display when you're doing video recording, look who's brighter. The Motorola is brighter. Okay. The Vivo, this is as bright as it will get. And the reason why is it is trying to prevent from overheating by the display. And then we have the same thing going on with the internal display. Check it out. Motorola is not as bright as the Vivo when you're viewing content, the HDR content. And it's very clear, very obvious that the Vivo is much brighter. But when you go to using the internal screen for video or capturing, check it out. The Motorola is brighter. They got swapped here on the screen, but you can see it's much brighter on the Motorola. So you see there's a different approach. It's interesting. They prioritize viewing on the Vivo, so it gets a brighter screen. When it comes to processing videos and photos, they dim the screen so that the processor doesn't overheat. So that's a different take, where on the Motorola, they kind of balance it out. When you're using or watching content, it's not quite as bright, but when you're actually creating content, in other words, making videos and photos, the screen is much brighter, which is when you really need it to be bright so you can actually see what you're doing. So I just kind of thought that was interesting and thought I'd share that with you. Now let's go ahead and do a deep dive in photos. So here we got both of them, and they both are using the 50 megapixel main sensor here. And as you can see, it looks like the Vivo is a little bit brighter when you look at the content here. In other words, you can see the storefront. There's a little more shadowing going on over here on the Motorola. I think it's just a little bit more dynamic range is what it is, because look over here at the Vivo. See, it's kind of yellowing. So as far as the color representation, I think the Motorola was definitely much more accurate. And I think that's the way they're processing. We're here on the Zeiss. They're going for more of a pleasing overall, what they think you want to see photo, which is interesting. So it kind of lifts the shadows a little bit. Let's go on to a zoom lens now. Now we are doing a 3 times on both of them. And as you can see, the same thing's going on here. It's a bit of a brighter image versus the Motorola. Does that make it clear? That's really hard to say, but if we go ahead and zoom in on, say, like this window here, see what's going on, you can see these signs really well in the window. I mean, just looking at the image itself, you can't see it, but when you zoom in, check that out. But you can see it on both of them. Now, is things a little clearer here on the Vivo? I think slightly. See how the building's a little darker? When you have a little more light, you can get a little more detail and clarity. And I think that that is what Vivo is going with here. Now let's go in with a 6 times zoom on both of them. As you can see here, I think the same play here, a little bit brighter. You can see it here, but for some reason that looks bright up there. Same thing. How about the detail? If we zoom in on some of this, let's see what we've got here. I think everything's nice and clear. And then on this one, same thing. you know, I think the clarity is there. But here's something I want to point out real quick, and it's this dress here in the window. I think maybe we can see it closer in the next photo. Let's do that. Go here to the next photo, and as you can see, darker image, lighter image. So what kind of detail do we have here? Check this out. Look at this dress. What color is this dress? It looks kind of black and white, but no, it's not. And I know because in person I saw it. It's actually got more color to it. So you lost detail here on the Vivo, and you can actually see that here in the window. There's more reflection. Everything looks a little better here on the Motorola. So Motorola captured the detail much better here as far as the colors. And I think the image itself may even be more clear or clearer or however you want to say it. So I like what Motorola has done here better. This, I believe, is a 20 times zoom on both of them. The previous one was 10, and you can see they're about the same, but actually the Vivo is a little bit clearer, I guess, because of more light, and you can see the bricks and everything where everything's darker. So Vivo consistently keeps the image a little brighter to allow more detail, and I think that's great. And I think you'd be happy with either one, but I think the Vivo is a slight bit clearer. Now I did shift here and do another 20 times zoom just to see a little bit of different image. And you can see here the AIs at work here, allowing more detail. You can see that it's a two-tone texture. You know, I don't know why, because of age or whatever, but the Motorola is allowing more of the detail to come out where you kind of get washed out just a little bit here on the Vivo. Matter of fact, check that out. You can't even see the brick up there where you can see it here on the Motorola. So I really like this image a little bit better, and it might be a personal preference here. And then here I'm going into 30 times zoom on both of them. And as you can see here, they're both handling really well. I think the AI is working a little bit better here on the Motorola because they both are using AI, but I give an edge to the Motorola simply because of detail. I mean, look at this. If you look closely, you can see this is kind of flattened out where you can see the dimension here, and that's mainly because of the dynamic range, I think, is much better. But this, you can see the dimension in the video where here everything kind of flattens out. So yeah, definitely give that to the Motorola. And then over here, we're going in at, I think, 50 times just to see how that works. And look at that. They're both doing really well. But again, the Motorola, I guess, is really perfected that AI just a little bit more, I think. You know, things are a little bit more crunched here on the Vivo. And then all the way into 100 times on both of these. And as you can see here, they're both doing about the same. The Motorola smooth things out, edges are sharper. You know, I think the AI is just handling it a little bit better. So you can see there in the daylight, it's kind of a trade-off between the two, you know. I think it's going to be a lot of personal preference. Me, I like the Motorola simply because I know it's going to be consistent and I'm going to get more detail, especially if I want to zoom in, because I do like zooming in on my phones. You know, I don't know what it is. It's just a thing with me. I do like to zoom in. And I think you're getting more detail out of the Motorola, and I think it's handling the color better. I don't really care for cameras that are too bright in processing. Now, you can adjust that, you know, with the setting. I believe it's called an EV setting. You can minus it a little bit on the Vivo so it's not quite as bright. You know, maybe that'll bring out more detail, but just point and shooting, I think the Motorola does a little bit better here. Now let's go ahead and move on to night photos. So here we are in the night photo. Looks like I captured a little more of this side building on the Vivo than I meant to, but you can see they're both doing really well. They're about the same. So let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit here. And unfortunately, I didn't catch it or didn't realize that a car pulled up here. So that's why this is a little brighter on this image. But I do think that the Vivo's image is a little bit clearer altogether versus the Motorola. And let's go ahead and zoom in just a tad bit so we can see here some of the detail. See, you can see the tattooing, you can see the signage. Over here, what happens if we detail in? I think you can still see all that as well, but you start to see pixels too, okay? So this starts to pixelate. So the brighter processing does really help out here at night on this thing. And you can see just a little bit more clarity on this, but I do like the Vivo a bit better on this image. So let's go ahead and move on to another shot here. This is zooming in at 6 times, I believe it is. And you can see they're both handling it well. I think the Vivo may be a little bit better because you look at this signage, but you know, it's blown out here on the Ville and not over here. But to be honest, I still think that there's more dimension looking here. You know, you can see it. So where everything's just kind of blacked out. So again, I think it goes back to dynamic range. You have more dynamic range on the Motorola. So let's go ahead and click in here. This is a 10 times zoom on both of them. And you can see they're doing well. The Motorola lights things up a little bit more, but here on the standard photo without cropping in, you do see some pixelation going on here, where this one seems to be a much cleaner view. And if we do crop in just a little bit, you can see here that the Motorola or the Vivo did a little bit better. And I even think there's more dimension here in the Vivo this time. So quite interesting how they do it. Now we're going into 20 times zoom on both of them. And as you can see, they're both doing pretty equally well, I think. You know, not as much pixelation going on here, but the photo seems to be a little clearer. Now, just for the fun of it, I wanted to see what they would do here at 50 times. You can see here, that's not too bad. And just to give you an idea how far that is, let's go here to the original photo here. It's this section right here, all the way down to the end of the street. So that's quite a huge zoom on both of these, and they're both doing it pretty well. I think the Motorola is actually AI is working a little more, where you've got a little more blur here. So when you look at these, interesting how they both handle it. Now moving on to selfies here. Now Motorola again struggles, I think, with its front-facing camera. Although it's not doing too bad, they're kind of even comparable. Although my shirt is more of this lighter blue that you see here on the Vivo, so Vivo's handling a little better. I think this is a sunlight shot, so it's just the Motorola is struggling with it. And then same thing in the shade here. In the shade, Motorola just kind of washed out. It just doesn't look good. It's got the shirt coloring better, you know, it's more accurate here, but the Vivo's handling it much better. They both have 20 megapixel cameras, so I'm not quite sure what the big difference is. And then when we use the rear facing camera, now we moved up to a 50 megapixel, and we have the f1.4, which means it allows more light in, but Vivo's handling it really, really well. You know, it's not allowing it to wash out, where over here on the Motorola, it got a little bit too bright, even though it's a darker f-stop. But this is definitely better than what it was doing with the selfie camera. You get quite a bit more detail. And then one more in the shade on both of them. Again, they're both handling it pretty good. I think the Vivo is a little more accurate though. So there you go on night shots and selfies. I think that the Motorola does, of course, really well. They both did really well at night. So it's a really big competition, and all it really depends. But again, I think I like the dynamic range on the Motorola a little bit better. So I think in most cases you are going to get a better shot overall. However, you get more detail in Vivo at times as well. But I believe it adds a little bit more yellow, which makes the coloring not quite so accurate. But then when it comes to selfies, Motorola always struggles on selfies, and you know, I really don't have much to say about that, except selfies on a Motorola is not a thing. They need to fix it so it doesn't process like it does. You know, they got a lot of work, long ways to go. Now that the photos are out of the way, let's take a look at videos, because things are a little bit different on videos, and I think you might be quite surprised. I know I was. Now this is a daylight, you know, shot around noon on both of them, and the sun is out bright, and you can see one of them, and it's the Vivo that happens to have a difficulty with the sunlight. Now this is the Zeiss lens, which is supposed to prevent sunlight glaring and everything. I don't know what's happening. It could be that I just don't have updated software on my Vivo, because it is a Chinese ROM and it's hard for me to get updates. But look at this. It's just really washing out things. And that glare is just crazy. So the Motorola, I think the colors, of course, are much more accurate, and it just handles everything so much better. You got a blue sky versus a white blown out sky here on the Vivo. It's just nuts how it's doing this. And when you take a look at this last image here, look how bright it is. It's just crazy. And it's not something that I would really feel comfortable or confident in using. So are things clear? It's really hard to say because it's so washed out. Now, I do want to show you something here. I did another comparison. Check this out. Look how much closer they are. But this is the Vivo X300 Pro. The Vivo X300 Pro is in second place on DxO Mark as far as the best cameras on a smartphone. There's only one, it's the Huawei, actually, that beat it out supposedly. But if you look at this, Motorola is hanging right in there with the Vivo X300 Pro. Now, the X300 Pro also has a video chip in there, or a photography chip in there. So that really helps things out, so the colors are quite a bit better and much more accurate. But look at these. They're almost identical. Motorola is handling itself really good right there with them. Now you see the two of them during daylight. I think Motorola really took it big time. Vivo was really struggling with the sunlight at noon. If you have a Vivo X Fold 5, I'd like to know how yours does, especially if you have an updated one. Mine may not be up to date simply because it is a Chinese ROM and I had difficulty getting updates. I get them every now and then, but it could be it's just really behind. But you can see that Vivo X300 having that extra photo chip inside of it for processing really does well, and Motorola really hung in there. Now let's take a look at the nighttime photos, or I mean videos. Check them out. So you can see at night they're doing pretty good, but I think the Motorola is jelloing a little bit more. It didn't do that before, but it seems to be jelloing. And I think they both are a little bit, but I think the Motorola seems to be doing it a little more. So I think Vivo's handling this pretty well, and it's because of that light, in the camera. It allows more light in. So the Vivo seems to be doing a little bit better here at night. But again, they're pretty close, it looks like to me, when you look at the texture. And you can see the brighter light and the yellow tint that we have to the Vivo. I don't really care for that yellow tint, but it's there. And when you zoom in, you can see the Motorola's a little better. So you can see at night, it's a little bit different story. The Vivo does a little bit better because it does allow more light in. It's a little brighter image. I'm not quite sure why the Motorola, you can see the jelloing a little more. I think it's because maybe when I compared it to other phones, those jelloed more. Motorola seemed to be the most stable, but here against the Vivo not jelloing as much. Maybe that's why I noticed it a little bit more. So now let's go ahead and move into a selfie video, and I did this mainly so you can hear the audio between the two of them. Now here's the video selfie. They're probably a little more evenly matched because they're both only 1080p, which is crazy in today's age. They're both 20 megapixel lenses, but at 1080p, that's not so great, and we know that with the Motorola, it's horrible on its 1080p selfie camera, so I'm really not liking it all that much. It doesn't really matter what kind of angle you're at. They're both horrible, at selfies. So don't take selfies with their front-facing cameras. Now you see this hair on the selfie. I couldn't tell while I was outside recording, but the Vivo did a whole lot better than the Motorola. The Motorola selfies, especially on video, has really got a lot to be desired. Now I'm thinking that it may be that they just need to update that software because for some reason it should be doing at least as well as the Vivo, I would think. But that haze, that unclear image is crazy on the Motorola. I'm betting they can improve that with a software update. So hopefully that'll happen sometime soon. As far as the audio on both of them, I think they were equal. I didn't care for one more than the other. I think they both did really well on the audio. Now, the experiencing with both of these phones, if you hadn't seen the first video, you might want to check that out where I cover everything else other than photography or the cameras. But after shooting that video and then going out yesterday and doing a photo shoot, and then today, the next morning, the Motorola battery is at 50%. I don't know if you can see that. And the Vivo is at 30%. Now they both have that 6,000 milliamp hour battery, so they should be close to the same. Of course, the Vivo's a little bit older, so maybe that's the deal. But I think that this being the newer chip here in the Motorola, it kind of is optimized a little better with the battery. So I think the Motorola is handling battery much better. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you think? Do you have the Vivo? Have you experienced it? Do you think that you're getting much more better video and photos out of it than I did? I like to know. Make sure you mention that in the comment. And if you've got the Motorola, if you have both of them, have you compared them? What do you think? For me and most of us here in the US, the Motorola is probably the go-to simply because you can get it here locally and it has the warranty service for 7 years, and it'd be very much easier, be much easier for us to access service on the Motorola than it would be on the Vivo. Now, if I missed something in this video that you want to see, make sure you comment down in the comments and let me know so I can make sure to cover that in future videos. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that as well so you don't miss out on future videos. And if you want to see some of these videos ahead of release, make sure to become a member of the channel. It really does help out and support the channel, and I'd appreciate that so I don't have to rely on YouTube as much. But besides, another thing you can do to help out the channel is make sure to smash that like button. If you haven't seen the first half of this video where I talk about everything else on these phones, check out this video here. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and God bless.